So today we are joined by Dr. Andrew Chappell. Andrew, how are you?
How are you doing, Phil? Yeah, I'm good. We just had a good chat off screen, and this will probably date this, but
Yes.
I've recovered from my viral infection of COVID, so I'm doing all right now. Thank you very much.
Good. So obviously we've touched base on a few things. That's always the way with podcasts. Is normally you get talking a little bit beforehand, and you're thinking that's a gem that we should have had in the recording. So some of it we might end up going over. Yeah. So just to give you a little bit of background, so for the audience, so Andrew is a hugely academically, I'm going to say rewarded. I think that's not the word, but you have a PhD in nutrition, degree in sports science and human nutrition. You've been in the world of research for, the longest time. I believe you're lecturing still, yes?
No, I just finished that to move full time into the coaching, but I was a lecturer for 6-7 years in human nutrition and physiology. So that's what I taught at Sheffield Hallam University and Robert Gordon University.
Amazing.
And at Aberdeen as well.
And now you're coaching full time. So we'll get into that and kind of what that entails. But I know that you've got a particular niche based off kind of your background, your passion, I guess, something that you've done forever, which is bodybuilding. So you've competed, you've won numerous titles. I believe there's some that you're still kind of clawing for out there and
yes. We talked off camera. I said I've probably got one more left in me. Whether I'll achieve it or not, I got third at the World Championships for the WNBF in 2019 pre-COVID. If I can go back and have another shot and try and get that title, I would retire quite happily. And if I went back and I got 5th or 6th place or something, I could still retire quite happily.
And I'm sure many of the audience that are watching could probably relate to this. But there's the strenuous kind of process and the challenging process that bodybuilding requires. And this is always quite an interesting topic of conversation. Obviously, it's an extreme, it's an nth degree of something where when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to training, when it comes to coaching, everybody wants to be in this tremendous shape. And obviously you're well cultured with respect to, what you know about this world, how you handle this world yourself personally, and obviously now coaching more so than ever. You obviously know what it's like for other people when you're trying to take them through that journey. So, and today, part of the conversation I wanted to have with you, because I know it's a specialist area for you. It's an area you know an awful lot about, which is kind of the gut and digestion, always a puzzling area for many, and something I think many have challenges with. So I think we'll get into that if we can a little bit and get your insight into that as to what's fact, what's fiction, what works, what doesn't work, what are the things that we can do as a population to improve our digestive systems, our guts, our the function of all of that stuff, and also kind of culprit foods and foods that are particularly not good for us. I think we've got to kind of go through this convincing stage with people of foods that are good for you versus foods that are bad for you. And we always hear this terminology of clean versus dirty food, I guess. Yep. And particularly in the world of bodybuilding, right? It's
absolutely. And I can touch on that as well.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that dialogue has came from that world, because I think years ago people looked at, when they wanted to get in shape, they wanted to lose a bit of weight, all these things, that you always look to the most extreme. So I think a lot of the information that we got about nutrition, about training, about all these things came from the world of bodybuilding. Many, many years ago, I remember as a youth reading Flex magazine and Muscle Media and all these different things. So we can touch on that sort of stuff. So tell me a little bit about your journey, I guess. When did all this start? When was this involvement in training, I guess, to start with? Was there a sporting background there that started it all, and then moving into bodybuilding and competing?
Okay, so it's a big question, but I guess my sporting background is football. So I played association football, so soccer. Scotland managed to get a result, by the way, against England. I'm just going to throw that in there the other day, although we are now out of the Euros. I have to say that as a proud Scotsman, but I played football for a long time.
Okay. And very rarely have I heard anybody call it association football. That's a...
Oh yeah, well, I knew this was going out internationally and that people might refer to it as soccer. But I played that. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed doing it. I always did athletics. And as I got a little bit older, I loved training. I sort of realized, okay, I was better at probably training the actual game stuff, like from there. And I realized I could train a lot harder than a lot of my peers who were maybe not quite as interested in the training, but to be frank, probably more talented than me at the actual skill side of the game from there. But I started training for the sake of, can I get better at my sport? Can I get better at football? And I must have been about 15, 16 at the time. Women started to become much more interesting as well at the same time. And you think, okay, my heroes on the film screens and stuff at the time were Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone. I know obviously you'll resonate with the WWF wrestlers like Macho Man and Ultimate Warrior and all these colossal, bigger than life characters. So that got me really interested in the gym and stuff. And I guess from there I realized, again, better at training. The football went to the side. I kept training. Guys in the gym, rather than women, started saying to me and taking interest in my physique, saying, you're quite good at this. You should maybe think about doing a bodybuilding show. And I guess around about 2006, I did my first one. And I've not ever really looked back since then. So it's probably a well-trodden path and a familiar story for lots of people that they can resonate with and sort of associate with that, building your confidence, building your self-esteem, going to the gym, enjoying it. And what's the book called? Is it Education of an Unlikely Bodybuilder with Sam Fussell? And he talks about getting the disease. It bit me. And I loved it. And because my heroes were, like I say, these guys, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was Mr. Olympia, then you're going to look to his workout guides and all that sort of stuff. And you get engrossed in it. And I suppose with anything, if you get a little bit of success in something, you sort of realize you're good at it. So I won my first ever contest. Maybe if I hadn't won it, I would have probably knocked it all in the head after that, because you know how hard it is. But I kind of just kept going. I did the first one, got to the British finals, came second. Because I'm competitive, I was like, right, I need to win this. So I went again next year. And then after that, I managed to go to, I went to the Natural Olympia in Greece. And because I'm ultimately a working class boy from the scheme and getting to travel the world and do all these great experiences, like the opportunities were there for bodybuilding, I really threw myself into it, and it opened my world up to so many different things. And academically, I just pursued it. I was like, what can I do in terms of understanding, reading around the area to maximize what I can get out of this? And one degree turned into two. And then my passion for knowledge went into teaching and sharing that stuff with other people to help bring them on from there. So that's a story, I guess, from there. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I think something an awful lot of people can relate to. I think anybody who went through that kind of action hero era, I think it still exists now. I think it's a little bit disbanded and kind of all over the places. The Rock still exists.
And, the Rock's carrying the torch now.
Yeah, he's carrying the torch very much so for that kind of action hero world. And a few of them are still popping up to this day. I mean, Stallone's still doing movies.
Thank God, yeah.
And Arnold's still doing movies and what have you, around other things, obviously. But yeah, I think a lot of people can resonate with that. And the bodybuilding path's an interesting one. And obviously following that alongside that huge sort of academic pursuit, which you don't always see that often. Obviously, my background was it was all down to the things I was interested in, right? And I ended up doing sports science for that reason, really. It was something I enjoyed and was into. And then you did this and then kept pursuing this. So was there at that time, wasn't there an end goal to it all? Obviously pursuing a PhD in anything, is there an end goal there, or was it a self-motivated thing? Was it an achievement thing, or was there something at the end of it you thought, right, this is where I want to go, this is what I want to pursue, and this is where I want to end up? Was it lecturing? Was it being a university lecturer? Was it being in the research fields? What was it that drove you to kind of do all that?
It's a great question. I suppose when I was doing my sports science degree, again, trying to understand the human body and from there, I knew I wanted to work with athletes when I was doing that. So it was about, okay, can I acquire the skills so that I can coach these athletes? And I've been fortunate enough to work with some great athletes down the years. But it was about acquiring that knowledge. And when I would be reading the scientific papers, and as you do, you sort of question the way that the things set up and how they run. But it's when you get to do your own projects, I really enjoyed it. That sort of idea of creating new knowledge and pursuing something and adding to the field. And I think it's a real privilege to be in a position to be able to create that knowledge and to again inspire other people and to improve the human understanding. And it was after I did my sports science degree, I realized nutrition was more interesting. And I don't think you can have one without the other. They're both obviously, they're both interconnected from there. But it was doing my master's, in which I got to do my master's project, which is like 5 months, 6 months unsupervised, or rather supervised, but you're just left to it to go and do a project. And I thought, no, this is for me. I really like this. I like the lifestyle. I like meeting people for seminars, reading papers, going to journal clubs, then trying to produce publications, working with the in the high-tech labs, doing all that sort of stuff. And I thought, right, I want to go on and understand more about science and the human body and broaden my understanding from there. And that's what then pushed me on to do the PhD. So it was, I guess, a personal journey to see, okay, I appreciate the knowledge, I understand that, I enjoy it, but also what am I capable of within myself, and what can I make of myself as well at the same time? Can I go on and be a doctor of nutrition from there? So was it? I mean, there's a status thing there as well, isn't there? You can't escape that.
That was actually what the question I was going to ask. Was there a thing when you were younger where you were, I want to be a doctor. I want to, because I don't know. I get the impression that you don't liberally sort of use that terminology.
No, I don't. You're right. I don't liberally sort of use it. But no, I wanted to be an astronaut. Obviously, that would have been cool. No, I just, like so many things in life, sometimes these things just kind of happen and the journey sort of develops along the way. And then
so there wasn't like a history of doctors in your family.
No, not at all. Not at all. And in the family, again, it was this sort of, I've got an interest in science. I am a naturalist. I love finding out about things and trying to understand them and having abstract thought processes and problem solving and things like that. So a PhD is a doctor of philosophy. So I'm a natural philosopher, and it probably suits me well to go on and do something like that from there. And I'm a bit eccentric as well. I mean, I'm not your natural PhD, as you can imagine, from there, but I would have like the crazy hair all over the place and everything like that, and I'd fit in probably quite well.
So what did you do? So your PhD was in what? So
my PhD was in the human colonic gut microbiota. So it was in nutrition. Okay. And nutrition is a real passion for me. So I did sports science. I went on and did human nutrition, human nutrition is more the study of human health rather than sports specific nutrition. So you've got public health nutrition in there alongside of it, so policies and things like that. But you've also got the biochemistry and stuff like that as well alongside it. So, and then my master's project, I did make sports specific on fish oils and the effects on performance. But I went on and I did the study of the human gut microbiota for several reasons. It was a new and interesting area. I wanted to challenge myself. I was interested in cardiovascular disease and fiber. And because we were studying, as part of this project, the effects of dietary fiber on human health, I was like, okay, well, that'll tie in with colonic health and gut health. And the ability to study the microbiome and work at the research institute. I knew if I went there, I was going to be leveled up significantly in terms of my scientific skill, my ability to plan experiments, my ability to have discourse and dialogue around science and really broaden my horizons so I can look at problems from a a different point of view. And it was amazing. It was great. I got some amazing experiences being able to go and present at conferences. I mean, the pinnacle was probably, I got to present at the Royal Society in Edinburgh, which was amazing. I mean, when you're talking about stuff like that, that's where the Scottish Enlightenment started back in the 19th century, of these great sort of giants like Maxwell, who basically invented physics and stuff like that, presenting. And then there's me doing my PhD presentation. So I got to do stuff like that. It was super cool. I loved it, and deal with stuff like genetics and do like experiments that were probably costing like 20 grand and stuff like that. And I'm fucking them up, and I'm like, oh shit. But no, it was great. So I went on the PhD in human nutrition, gut health. We were interested in looking at the effects of oats and barley, on gut health. So I'm Scottish. I joke that I'm a doctor of oats, really. So that's why I'm fueled by Scott's Oats on Instagram. But we looked at that, and we wanted to see, okay, well, we know that these things are healthy. Why are they healthy for us beyond the fact that it's just dietary fiber? And do specific microbes grow in your gut which are potentially beneficial for your health? So that was the sort of thesis associated with it. And we would do these really elaborate what we call in vitro experiments, whereby you're trying to replicate the human gut conditions, and you run these things for like 3 weeks, and then you feed in oats and barley, and then you've got your microbial population growing at the same time, and you're sampling it, and then you're sending it away to the genetics lab, and then you're looking at sequences and stuff like that. So amazing skills to learn, really, really good. So that was what we were sort of doing from there. I'm sorry, but I've kind of forgot the question. I've got quite excited, you can tell.
No, I mean,
that's what I studied.
Ultimately, with there's a lot of confusion, and part of the reason I wanted to talk to you is because I know you're a bit of a specialist in this field. You've done a huge amount of research in this field. And obviously there's stuff there where we talk about foundations, right? So your interest was in the extreme and the almost refining aspect. So when we talk about athletic performance and athletes and high performance, we're talking about refining the foundations of something you would expect to be there. But as we well know, the foundations often aren't there, but people are chasing the high performance stuff. So
we discussed this before that we went on air, but you're totally right. Yeah.
So really what you went back to was the foundations, and you're talking about gut health, and you're talking about, people's overall health, and you talk about Public Health England and all these different things that.
I would agree with that. Yeah. Going back
to kind of fall into place there. So the gut's an area that I feel, and I'm sure a lot of people do feel, that there's a huge amount of confusion about. So we hear these terms, microbiota, microbiome, we hear all these terms kind of thrown about. So I really wanted you to kind of create a little bit of, layman's terms around these things. So what are these things? Why should they concern us? And ultimately, based off your research and what that knowledge you've garnered over these several years of doing this, what's the knowledge that you've garnered? Obviously, we can talk about oats, which are, a staple. Many people talk about breakfast and something that you based a lot of your research on. Are there foundations there? Is there more to it than we think? Because ultimately, people will look at something like oats and go, oats is a healthy breakfast, but we don't really know why. And obviously, you begged that question there. You said, is it just there's a bit of fiber in it? But then is it the right kind of fiber? What does it do?
Yes.
How does it all work? So could you shed some light for our audience on a lot of these things? So I guess microbiome, what is microbiome?
Well, let's get into that. I think a good thing to talk about here would be just a basic overview would be very helpful for some people. And I think just that basic overview would probably dispel a lot of myths and confusions around things. And I wrote down here a few things that people are probably a little bit confused about, and just some basic definitions to start with. So when we talk about the microbiota, we're talking about the microorganisms that live on the body, right? So that's what we're talking about. And when I say on the body, I'm talking about you've got a skin microbiota, you've got a behind the ear microbiota that's distinct, you've got an oral cavity microbiota under the tongue, you've got a genital microbiota, it's obviously different between men and women. You've also then got the gut microbiota, yeah? So there's different microbiotas which have got different states in terms of what you call a healthy individual and what someone might be in, say, a disease state. So I've got a bit of a croaky voice just now. So my throat microbiota is probably slightly different from a full healthy one because I'm a little bit inflamed. People use the term microbiota, microflora, and microbiome almost interchangeably, yeah, a lot of the time. There is a bit of a distinction. I mean, a microflora is a bit of a more old-fashioned term for the microbiota from there, but they're often referring to the gut when they talk about that. The microbiome refers to the genome, so the genetics associated with the microbes that live in there. But people will use them, as I say, completely interchangeably. And the other point that I made at the start was I talked about microorganisms. I didn't just talk about bacteria, because you've got to realize that it's complex. So you've got microorganisms, including bacteria, something we call archaea, which are slightly different types of microorganisms, similar to bacteria. You've also got viruses, so you've got the virome that's in there as well. And then you've also got something called the mycome, which is essentially fungus. So it's complex, but a lot of the time when we talk about the microbiota or the microbiome, we're talking about really the bacteria, and a lot of people are talking about the bugs that live in your gut. Yeah. So does that all make sense to start with? Does that?
Yeah. So when we're talking about, you know, bacteria, again,
yeah.
I'm sure you'll probably expand onto this, but people talk about good and bad bacteria. I think it's important to kind of get what that definition means, because again, it's kind of like this good and bad fats, good and bad this, that. We have this very kind of, it's either good or it's bad. When in fact, I know there's kind of a crossover there where some of the bad stuff we term is good in many respects, but some of the, you know, good stuff is bad if there's too much of it or whatever it might be in many contexts, right? So you know, just expand on that rather than me digging a root.
I've got got that some notes here on this, but if you can imagine, you've got what you would describe as a healthy state for your gut to be in, yeah?
Yeah.
And the healthy state for the gut is characterized by a very high degree of microbial diversity, if you like. So the average person might have between around about 130 to 140 different individual species of bacteria living within the gut, yeah? Someone who's in maybe a more disease state, so someone like Crohn's, colitis, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, something like that, will have a reduced number of species within within their gut. And because it's reduced, they've also got a reduced amount of potentially genetic function, because there's less bacteria, there's less genetics. And that in itself is associated with poor health, yeah? So that's the thing in terms of so-called good and so-called bad. Now, there are some particularly species which we think, or at least we know are probably good for us. And there are ones which, you know, again, if you've got a overabundance of them, then they'll be particularly bad for us. But even things like something like Clostridium difficile, which gives you this C. diff, vomiting and diarrhea, etc., which can ultimately lead to people getting dehydrated, and if you're a little bit older, it can kill you. Even that, you've got very, very small amounts of them that live within a healthy person's gut. It's just it gets out of control and it overgrows, and then it becomes an issue. So you're talking about good bacteria, you're talking about bad bacteria. People use terms like probiotics. Yeah. So that'll be a familiar one for a lot of people. And a probiotic is something which is a potentially beneficial bacteria that, when administered, confers a health benefit to the individual. And then you've got an idea of something called a prebiotic, which is a carbohydrate or almost a fuel source that you would take on a day-to-day basis, which would cause probiotic bacteria within your gut to potentially grow and expand, again, to confer a potentially beneficial health effect. Does that all make sense so far, Irma?
Yeah, so in summary, so a prebiotic is ultimately feeding probiotics.
That's right.
So
yeah.
the idea is that you're giving it its fuel so it can
Yeah.
propagate and grow.
That's exactly it.
And then probiotics someone would theoretically take if somebody was missing some of that good stuff. So they had a bad diet or had some kind of illness or whatever it might be. So into that obviously ties in antibiotics, right? So do you want to explain a little bit about antibiotics?
So, well, antibiotics they're antibiotics, so they're bad for the bacteria that live in your gut. So the idea is obviously you take it for a bacterial infection if you weren't feeling particularly well. But one of the problems of antibiotics beyond, as we know, antibiotic resistance, which is a major issue that we keep talking about in the news, is that it effectively can wipe out your gut microbiota. So it removes a lot of the foundational bacteria that's in there. And then you're putting yourself in a situation whereby you need to almost establish a new healthy gut microbiota again. And I guess the difficulties are around that is, do you effectively potentially wipe out something there that was potentially good for you before? And then you need to then, as you've just suggested, use something like a probiotic to reestablish good health from there. That's the theoretical basis for it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So again, we talked, well, you talked briefly there about antibiotic resistance, which is your body's inability to use it what it's meant for, right? And then, so what we don't want to do here is push people away from using antibiotics when they're appropriate, right? And we don't want people to
of course,
all of a sudden these are horrendous for you. But part of the reason that they talk about not taking on antibiotics when they're not required is one of these reasons, right? Is that it can
you're right. That's
compromise health states, right?
No, you're totally correct. I think what might be beneficial, I don't know if you agree, Phil, is talking about some of the functions of the microbiota, because then people can get a bit of an idea about why they're important and why you should care about this, and again how it ties in with disease states, because that comes back to this idea about what's good and bad from there. Do you think that would be helpful?
Yeah, and ultimately, what can people do to keep it healthy?
Yeah. What
can people do to feed it? And obviously, we talk about things like fermented foods and blah blah blah. All these things that are out there that kind of tout a benefit in some cases, or ones which actually provide a benefit. So I'm sure oats are in there as well. But we've got, just so people are left with a clearer understanding of what's kind of defined as a healthy diet. With respect to managing your gut and keeping your gut healthy. What are the things that could potentially cause it problems, which I'm sure are fairly prevalent things in a lot of people's diets?
Yeah, and that's a great point as well.
And so really just getting that insight.
So the point about what could cause it problems, that becomes more apparent once you sort of understand the functions of it. So the gut microbiota does a lot of things. And one of the things that you appreciate that it really does is it's responsible for the development and the maintenance of the health of the whole gastrointestinal tract. So if you were to take what's called a nootabiotic animal, so an animal that's been grown in an environment which has no exposure to microbes, so it's germ-free, we call it, then they never develop an immune system. They just don't develop an immune system. So they don't get all the T cells, the B cells, the dendrites, all that sort of, they just don't have it, which you can imagine leads to a whole lot of different problems in terms of just normal function, right? So it never develops an immune system, but the GI tract doesn't develop properly either. So instead of these sort of villi that you see projecting through the GI tract to absorb nutrients, you get a very flat GI tract. So your ability and your capacity to absorb nutrients is much reduced. So it really is, it's responsible from when you are a neonate, so newborn, to an adult, all the way through your life cycle, and developing that GI tract and keeping it healthy. So it helps you have that mucosal lining around the GI tract. It helps you create these tight junctions between the cells so that you don't get any sort of leaky gut that people talk about from here. It gives you immune tolerance. So, I mean, you're familiar with obviously things like peanut allergies and so on. Well, people can just have intolerances with foods, and it primes the immune system, so you get a normal response to a potential food item or just an environment in general. It's like hay fever is a good example from there. So it does a lot of those things from there, and then it provides your body with energy as well, ultimately. So back in the day, it was always thought you got all your energy from the small intestine. The large intestine just absorbed water and produced feces.
Yeah.
But we now know, obviously, that the GI tract, it's got an ability to ferment carbohydrates that find their way through there, so fiber. And if they can ferment those carbohydrates, they produce short-chain fatty acids. Those short-chain fatty acids are absorbed by the body, and they're used as an energy source. So you get energy off the back of it. And you're looking at around about 2 calories per gram of fiber, although there's some variation in that as well. They produce vitamins within that GI tract because the microbes produce all these different metabolites off the back of it. And then because they produce short-chain fatty acids, they keep the pH level, because they're acids, low within the gut. And that excludes lots of bacteria, pathogens we call them, that are potentially bad bacteria that could damage you from there. And then finally, the other thing that they'll do is they'll provide colonization resistance. So if you imagine you've got a very complex ecosystem, microbes consuming lots of different carbohydrates, and then a new one comes in and it wants to try and get its niche, it can't outcompete the other ones that are there already because of this colonization resistance. So that's a flavor, if you like, of the stuff that the microbiota does. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So in keeping it healthy, we're almost building a resistance up to disease states and illness and all these different 100%. Things, right? So it's a massively important part to our world and our internal system, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So now you understand a little bit of its functions, you can see how a dysbiotic state, so that a unhealthy microbial state, can lead to a breakdown in some of those sort of situations. So you can end up with things like hypersensitivity to food items or environments if you've not got a properly developed immune system from when you're a youngster. So people are really interested in things like, okay, well, when a newborn is born, if they get a cesarean section versus a uteral birth, at least a difference in the microbiota. And what happens with that in terms of the development and the tolerance of food items when they're growing up? If they're breastfed compared to being bottle fed, that leads to a difference as well at the same time. If you live in a city compared to if you live on a farm, you're exposed to different microbes. Again, that leads to a difference from there. And then the things that we're interested in, like the diet that you've got, if you're in a situation whereby you're providing the microbes within your gut with things like fermented foods, as you say, prebiotics, or just a diet which is sufficient in dietary fiber, then you're putting yourself in a situation whereby you're more likely to be healthy and have a healthier gut profile. And when you look at the epidemiological evidence and you see, okay, well, a low fiber diet ultimately tends to correlate with things like colorectal cancer, it's because you're having an effect on the gut microbiota populations in the long term, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So a healthy gut's super important.
Okay, so with respect to what people aren't doing and what people should be doing, is there a kind of general guideline as to these are the things that'll keep your gut healthy? Because it's almost like we have this sticking plaster mentality, don't we? Where people will think of the gut and go, look, when I've got a problem, I'll go and deal with it. Instead of going, right, what I'm going to do, I'm going to prevent the problem in the first place. I mean, in the world of sports performance, we talk a lot now about prehab, right? So rehab is something you do after the event. Prehab is preventing it happening in the first place. So when we talk about the gut, it's really a matter of, let's prevent a lot of these issues beforehand, which I guess comes back to almost touting a healthier diet and almost giving people the grounds to do that, because ultimately we're talking about foods that are more challenging to get a hold of in many respects because, they're not as palatable. People need cooking skills a lot of the time to be able to develop these and all of these things that kind of have disappeared. And you know, back when I was a kid, you know, a TV dinner or a microwave dinner or whatever it might be, was largely made up of things that had none of this bacteria even present anymore. You know, it had a shelf life of and again, that's an interesting topic with food, is that obviously when we look at foods, this was always something I always used to state to people. Look, in today's day and age, we've got these packaged foods that come, but you look at the use by date on them. And if the use by date's very, very short, it almost indicates to you that there's a lot of living stuff in there that is probably going to go off because of the bacteria that's involved.
Yeah, no, right? Good point. Yeah.
So ultimately, if it's got a short date, it's probably going to be pretty good for your gut. But then we've also got things that sit outside of that. You know, you can stick we talked about oats there. You put oats in a cupboard from, you know, probably the best part of a year or more, I guess. They'd
probably be fine. Yeah.
And they're still fine, right? So where is this with respect to the foods that we consume, the foods that we eat? You know, where do processed foods sit with respect to feeding this bacteria, this good stuff? Where does it sit with respect to, you know, putting you at higher risk of potentially all these concurrent problems, I guess?
Well, unsurprisingly, I mean, if you were just to adhere to the government guidelines on things like the Eat Well guide, so you've seen these, and consume the recommended daily amount of fiber, which is about 29 grams, is what we reckon you should consume per day in your diet, then that would put you in a pretty good position for your health around the colonic gut microbiota, because ultimately, as I say, these microbes grow and proliferate in your gut based on the amount of carbohydrate and fiber which is in your diet. So they get fed by anything that makes its way through to your lower gastrointestinal tract. That's what they grow off of. So it's making sure that you get an abundance of fiber in your diet. It's making sure that you get both the soluble and the insoluble stuff. So getting the whole grains in your diet, like from the oats, as we've referred to several times, but also from the wheats in your diet. It's making sure that you're eating vegetables and you're getting things like the skin that you'd get from a cucumber or a tomato in your diet, or an apple or something like that. And you're getting the fiber in your diet is ultimately the thing that's going to cause you to have a much more healthy microbial profile. There are difficulties with that because some people tolerate these things, as you know, much better than other people. So we've got this is the ideal situation scenario versus the practically what someone can potentially do. But those are the sort of things that we want to be trying to do. And I can talk about an interesting study if you'd like about David, which sort of David et al. That emphasizes this stuff. So what they did in this particular study was they took a group of people, randomized control trial, crossover, and they took microbial samples from them. And the way you do that, get the microbiome, is you take a fecal sample. But you take a sample from someone and take them a sample from every day. I think it was for a week, to establish what their baseline microbiota was. They then put them on a high plant-based diet, high fiber diet, and then they put them back on the baseline diet. They then switched them onto I guess what you'd describe as sort of like a carnivore diet. So really high meat content, very low fiber content. That was it from there. And then they look at the microbial profile when you're comparing what is essentially a high fiber diet, by the way, versus a low fiber diet with a lot of animal produce in it. And what you sort of see is, okay, I talked about diversity earlier on, but the microbial diversity goes down significantly within the gut when you take the fiber out of it. Goes down significantly. You start to see a much larger proportion of the so-called bad bacteria, so the enterobacteria, the sort of bacteria that would cause you problems long term. You start to see a much higher gut pH. So it's less acidic environment. So these pathogenic bacteria can proliferate. You start to see much less short-chain fatty acid production. So you're not getting all the beneficial effects that these metabolites produce on the gut. You start to see things like secondary bile salts being converted, which are potentially pathogenic. And if you take a lot of these compounds, these metabolites, and you just treat colon cells and petri dishes with this stuff, you find out, okay, they develop into carcinogenic cells. So these are only very short-term studies that look at this sort of stuff. But you can imagine if someone follows a diet and a lifestyle for 20, 30 years of eating highly processed foods, very low fiber diet, that you really set yourself up for long-term colorectal cancer situations from here. So not the healthiest of diets from here. And it leads to lots of other questions around about, okay, well, you can have a higher meat-based diet as long as you've got enough fiber in there to offset that. You probably can, but it's probably the really low fiber content, which is a real issue in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So when we talk about dietary modalities and dietary methods and things like this, so obviously keto is a big thing right now. Low carb diets have probably been a big thing for the last 5 decades. So where do we stand with those with respect to, obviously a low carb diet depends on the extremity of what you mean by low, I guess.
Yeah, of course.
And then obviously keto, which eradicates, carbohydrates ultimately completely, right? So where do you stand with those, and where are they at with respect to a health profile?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I mean, you've got to take a sort of bigger picture approach, don't you? If you're encountering a client who's got a BMI of 45 or 50 or something like that, is that a greater danger that to their health than putting them on a keto diet or a low carb diet for, say, 6 months to lose some weight, or a year to lose some weight? So you got to weigh that up. So it's not black or white, I think, from there.
I like that answer.
I think if you follow something like that long term, probably not going to be the most healthy for your gut. But again, can you offset that by potentially taking a probiotic or supplementing with fermented foods, prebiotics, and getting enough fiber in there? And maybe you can maintain that keto state that you're after and maintain the healthy gut by supplementing with the prebiotic on there to manage the potential situation. The answer to that question is I don't know, because I've never seen a study that's done that. I've never seen it, but it's a great question. So what is the worst evil, I suppose? From a weight loss perspective, highly effective. It's something that we've all got in our sports nutrition toolbox. 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 20 weeks doing a diet like that, probably not going to kill you. 20 years of doing it, maybe not the best for your health. And then we factor in genetics. And then post that, just from my own experience of bodybuilding type diets and working with clients, how good is your tolerance for different foods likely to be post that? And this is a question for you. I don't know if you've ever known people to become allergic to certain food items after excluding them for a long period of time.
I think sensitivity to them, I think certainly is something that I've encountered, where people all of a sudden, and it's almost like I wouldn't say it's a psychological response. It's a response where they get an alarming reaction to it with respect to, it might be fluid or whatever it might be, where, particularly things like bread, right? Bread. Yeah, people reintroduce bread and all of a sudden they feel a little bit bloated, they feel a little bit uncomfortable. But then there's also that counter argument, which I always talk about with respect to bodybuilding and bodybuilding diets, is that people come off bodybuilding diets and then go to an extreme with the foods that they love.
You're right.
Totally. So John's finished his bodybuilding diet, gone off, consumed an entire loaf of bread in one sitting, and then has had a funny reaction to it. So now in his head, John thinks he's got some kind of gluten or bread intolerance, so therefore eradicates bread completely again. And it's this kind of shallow inclusion. And I think that bread's always been that kind of, people hammer the hell out of bread. And
because bread is good.
Yeah, I don't know how you feel about it, but we have, I have bread, not necessarily on a daily basis, but I'll have bread 3 or 4 times a week. And
probably as well, actually. Yeah, probably as well.
And I'm a big proponent of good, hearty, packed full of seeds, but to me, that's the stuff I love. But I remember being a kid and I wouldn't touch, and I mean, brown bread's a bad example, but, I wouldn't touch anything but white bread, white bread was like, and again, I don't know why there was that resonance towards it. And I think kids in general do that, but I think it's just because it's plain, it's simple. It's not, you know, you don't have those little bits, and you don't have the things you're not sure of what they are. And I think there's always that kind of sits in there. So yeah, I think I've definitely seen it with people when they go back or revert back. Certainly when they've eradicated something they thoroughly love, right? This is the thing when you talk about people with, you know, they take chocolate out of their diet, and the problem isn't chocolate. The problem is their overconsumption of chocolate, you know, and also then the type of chocolate, and the, you know, and again, chocolate isn't just chocolate anymore, is it? It's you know, it's emblazoned with a million other different things. But
I wonder, some context might be helpful, because I've studied bodybuilders and what they do. And what I've seen is the average bodybuilder at the start of their diet will consume around about 12 to 13 different individual food items. By the time they get ready to get on stage, they're only consuming around about 9 food items, because it becomes more restricted.
What's the average? The average is about
that is about the average
of general people.
Oh, I don't know what the average is for general people.
General people, I remember some stats somewhere around about 20 late 20s, I think, about 28. I think the average person is about 20.
Over the course of a week. Yeah,
I think it's something like 28 different types of food, which is a remarkably low number in many respects, right? You'd think that
you would look at the National Dieting Nutrition Study, you'd get that sort of data from on there. But you've seen a very low amount people are consuming, and then they go in.
I could be completely out. I recall something around about the 28 mark with something I'd read somewhere, so I might be way out. But it's a very low number. I always recall it being a far lower number than I ever anticipated. You know, so people don't consume many. So they've got to the end of bodybuilding, and they're consuming only 9 different. And when we talk about type, 9, what are we talking?
You can guess some, right? So we're talking
broccoli,
potatoes, maybe sweet potatoes is a different one. Rice. Oats is very common. That's the primary carbohydrate course that you're having. After that is then chicken, eggs, probably broccoli, green beans. You might get some tuna or some other sort of white fish in there, or a steak. And or protein powder, that's the other one. That's pretty much it, is what people are going to consider. And that sounds about right, yeah? Yeah, so that's what they're consuming on average. So they go and have all these breads. And I just wrote down there, as you were saying, do you remember Nasser El Sabati?
Yes.
Great bodybuilder. I remember reading Flex magazine when he first started. Don't know how true this is or not, but it was one of these interviews, and he was saying that he knew he needed calories when he was young, so he used to eat 3 loaves of bread a day.
And I always recall, because he was enormous, right? He was huge.
Second in Olympia a couple of times.
But I always remember reading magazine articles, and I always felt I took him a little bit more seriously because he wore glasses.
Yeah, me too. He seems like he's intelligent.
He was almost like you know, the depiction of Hulk in the most recent Avengers movie, where he was all of a sudden intellectual. He was almost intellectual Hulk. So it was this Bruce Banner kind of hybrid. But no, I remember him. But so when people are demonizing these foods, you know, just in general, right? You know, do you have a theory? Do you have research? Do you have, you know, what's this demonization typically based on? And when we talk about allergies, you know, allergies is a huge topic, right? People are self, you know, diagnosing themselves as allergic to this and intolerant to this. You know, susceptible to this.
But ultimately, I mean, you work with people, and you've worked with people for a long time, that you'll be very familiar with the fact that people are very poor at keeping records of things and actually working out what's going on. I mean, the only way you're going to really know is if you take a dietary history, you do an exclusion diet. You maybe go and get like what's called an IgA test, where you get a prick of the allergen on it and it wheels up, where you get a blood test to check what's going on. But there's, if I can remember them, there's 14 common food allergies, There's 14. If you go into the BDA website, British Dietetics Association, or is it the FSA, you can find them, but there are common ones. So there's things like, bread, we've talked about, so gluten, dairy, so milk, eggs.
And when we talk, just a quick one there on that, Andrew, on the dairy one. So obviously we've seen the rise of late of lactose free, right? So when people talk about dairy intolerance or dairy allergies or things like this, are they talking about dairy in general, or is it lactose? Is it a combination?
Yeah, now you're going into a topic there where it's what we call IgE mediated allergies, e.g., you get an immune response off of the back of an allergy because you're not able to tolerate it appropriately. You consume the food item, the immune system identifies that as something that they call it non-self, potentially harmful, and then you get a response. So you break out in a rash or something. Yeah. Whereas a lactose allergy is to do with a lack of the actual enzyme within your gut, lactase. So you can't break down the disaccharide sugar from there. So, I mean, I'm not teaching you how to suck eggs on what that is, but that's what's happening there with that, rather than necessarily an IgA associated allergy with lactose. I'm sure you've heard stuff about, in the West, we've got a longer tradition of consuming animal-based products. Or rather, let me rephrase that. That's not quite accurate. We've got a long tradition in the West of consuming milk and cheese and things like that, and other dairies, well beyond infanthood, when you normally stop drinking milk. In the Middle East, for example, where they've got a lot of problems with milk allergies, and that means that we've got a tolerance for the ability to consume milk much more so than in the West than in the East. So I don't know. I think maybe there is a bit of demonization of milk in the same way that gluten was really popular to be demonized a few years ago. And people want these different milks, and then at the same time there's sustainability issues as well, that the consumer we've now got to deal with is more environmentally conscious than they were before when gluten allergies and things were going on. So there's no doubt it requires more resource to produce milk than, or actually, do you know what? I don't know. I was about to say something there I wasn't sure about. I don't know how hard it is to produce almonds, milk, and things like that compared to.
I mean, this is always the debate, isn't it? It's always the debate you get between kind of the vegan world.
You need farmland still to do that.
And the non-vegan world, which is always an interesting topic, which is what are the resources that are required in order to farm a particular resource or a commodity, right? And there's always this argument with things like almonds is one in particular that I know is discussed quite a lot, isn't it? Because it's the resource that it takes to produce a pint of almond milk versus a pint of milk, as we know it. And I know there's certainly a lot of debate out there. I'm not an authority on it.
I don't know myself.
I don't know enough about it, but it's certainly an interesting topic. I mean, they talk about farmland and wheat, barley, etc., and obviously, there's a lot of death involved, I guess, with combines and blah blah blah. And there's always that debate. And obviously, statistically, a lot of this stuff we don't know, do we? We don't. I
don't know. It's not an area I could say enough about from there. There's probably some people listening to this tearing their hairs out, going, "You dunces, Andrew and Phil." I mean, obviously, it takes more to do this than that. But we've got off on a tangent here. So milk's an enzyme deficiency essentially. The other, and then there's a cultural thing around it from there. The other ones are sort of IgE mediated immune responses. There's other ones like nuts, mustard seeds, celery, lupin, sulfates from their mollusks, for example. But that's something that's probably taking place in the upper gastrointestinal tract rather than the lower gastrointestinal tract associated with the microbiota, actually. So it's a hypersensitivity issue up there, which I suppose you could relate to the priming later on. But some of these foods get demonized from there, and you can probably find a diet book for any of these things on why you shouldn't be consuming crustaceans or celery or milk or something like that based on someone's hypothesis.
Yeah, and it's an interesting area, and it's this kind of self-exclusion, isn't it? It's this thing when somebody decides that's not good for me based off the fact that I consumed it once and had some kind of reaction that maybe wasn't even correlated to it, right? It's and I guess that's that scientific way of looking at things. I guess, you know, we're going to look at things slightly differently in that we're going to ask about, hold on, but what were the other things that were involved at this point?
Yeah,
and it's the same way,
exactly.
you know, you look at studies, don't you? And the first thing you do is rip them apart. You know, you want to find out what's wrong with them, not what's right with them. And it's that, you know, it's that kind of mindset and that mentality of how you look at things. So
I guess one of the things which is worthwhile mentioning about the gut microbiota, though, in relation to demonizing foods and things like this, is that like fiber, as I've made a point about, is very, very important. And if you had prebiotics, it's useful. But when we talk about disease states are very, very different from just the person who's got a bit of traveler's diarrhea or something like that, or got a little bit of a bloating or something like that. So Crohn's and colitis, and I've worked with clients and I've spoke to gastroenterologists about this, and I've modified clients' diets around this sort of stuff and saying, we'll try this and we'll try that. And a lot of the time we've found situations where it's just stress. Stress has been the major factor which has caused flare-ups in these things, and we can throw everything at them, including the kitchen sink in terms of probiotics and all this sort of stuff, and get very, very little response. And if they reduce their stress levels, it makes a massive difference.
So let's expand a little bit on that. So obviously now we're starting to get into what's commonly known, right, as the gut-brain axis, right?
Yes. I'll go into this one. An anecdote, right? So there's a famous scientist called Wilson, right? And he was doing experiments on rats, right? So he had his control group and he had his placebo group, right?
Yeah.
And the problem with Wilson was, right, he was rubbish at injecting his rats with the actual placebo or the drug that he was trying to implement them. Right. So they would run a mile, he'd have them on the lap and he'd run, and they'd have to scurry underneath surfaces and counters and stuff, and he'd have to like get them all out and stuff like that with like a stick and stuff, and they were all petrified of this guy, right? And he noticed something, that when he was doing the experiments, he noticed that they were every one of them, the placebo and the control ones, they're all developing ulcers. They're all getting stomach ulcers, right? He was stressing them all out. It was because his handling techniques weren't particularly good there. And that's when you started getting your first stress-associated diseases started coming along in the 1960s and 1970s, and GPs were like, oh God, I'm going to have to start talking to my patients now about just calm down a bit and just chill out and woosah and meditate and all this sort of
I'm sure
stuff.
that calm down a bit doesn't really work in most cases, right?
No. So that stuff all started happening. And so there's a precedent for the nervous system relating to the gut, to gut health. And you'll like this story. So another anecdote here is, or I'll get to this, because the GI tract is associated with the enteric nervous system. So that's the nervous tissue which controls the motility of it and everything like the movements and so on. The gut microbiota sits right on the edge of the cells in the GI tract, and it's separated by a thin mucosal layer, which has got antimicrobials and so on. But these bacteria can secrete their own metabolites, their own compounds, and that can interact directly with the nervous system. So people have theorized that, okay, well, the nervous system could be directly impacted by the gut, and that could impact your ability to send hunger signals, for example. And there's a precedent again for this in nature. So toxoplasmosis, right, is a parasite that lives in the feces of cats and in the gut of cats. So cats will leave their feces lying about, and then mice and rats will come along and they'll eat the feces. They'll consume this parasite. And then what it does is it completely removes their aversion to the predator. So they see a cat and they don't run away from it.
Right.
They don't get scared. So the cat comes along and it gobbles it up. And then that's the bug's life cycle. Like that. So we have got precedents in nature of
what's it called? What's this bug called?
Toxoplasmosis, right?
Toxoplasmosis.
This is famous, right? It's most famous because that's what the character Tommy dies of in Trainspotting, the movie, if you remember.
Ah, yes.
That's what gets him. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So there is a precedent of this, and people have come up with these ideas like, okay, well, who is driving who here? If you've got bugs in your gut that need to survive on simple sugars or fats or something, have they got the ability to interact with your immune system and then tell your immune system to send a signal to your brain to drive a certain behavior to take place to make you seek out these sort of different foods?
Interesting.
If you see it, so it's kind of, it's quirky. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a nice idea.
So where are we at with science with that? So is this?
I don't know.
Is this just simply it's not a field of concern for you? It's not a field that you've researched hugely, or is it just that it is all theoretical right now?
Do you know what? It kind of comes down to some of this stuff that Robert Sapolsky would talk about, and he would say, like, is there such a thing as free will, Bill? Like that's where you're going with that stuff, because it's like, no, I make the decisions on what I'm going to do rather than the neurological signals that get sent before the hormone that gets sent before the environment that I'm growing up at. It's who's driving who. So I don't even know how you conduct an experiment in a human with the complexities to try and prove those sort of things. I'm sure you could probably look at, okay, well, if we've got certain microbial profiles, does that drive leptin levels in a certain way? Does that drive, but an animal should maybe have to dissect them, collect cadavers. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. It's not something that, again, I'm concerned about, but it's cool stuff. It's really cool.
It's a very interesting theory, and it's very interesting, you know, and I guess that's that thing where people are, you know, it's that, do you control your own behaviors, or is some little bit of bacteria somewhere on the line sending a signal and saying, look, you've got to do this. So it's
like I said, it's really, really cool. It's really cool. I think we can maybe leave our audience to ponder that one.
That's a huge one. Well, in fact, I think that's a great one to finish on, and we'll leave that in the stratosphere for people to deliberate on, and maybe we'll dig into that another time with.
Well, I'd love if you found this interesting and your viewers find it interesting, and they can deal with my zany ideas and my Scottish accent, and I'd love to come back on, Phil, and talk about some of this stuff again.
I think there's some great topics we've covered there. I think that, you know, and really just a clearer understanding of things that people probably just didn't get before. Certainly for me, there was a lot of reinforcement there. There was a lot of stuff that made complete sense. So I will thank you, Andrew. Obviously, you're doing your coaching.
Yep.
Pretty much focused on bodybuilding. You're coaching some strong men and
that's right, yep.
I believe. So where will people find you?
So you can get me at ProPrepCoaching.
Look at that.
Yep, that's right. I've even got a t-shirt on. So www.ProPrepCoaching.com. You can find us on Instagram at ProPrepCoaching as well. And if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me at Fueled by Scott Oates on Instagram. And just before I go, I'm going to plug the latest paper that I've been accepted for publication. If you check out the Journal of Human Kinetics website, you can find my latest paper on there, and it's the biopsychosocial effects of competition preparation in natural bodybuilders. It's quite a mouthful, that one.
I would say, yeah, that's a hell of a title. So, and obviously you're still in the research field, so there's going to be more papers. Right. I know that if you do a search on you on PubMed, there's a bunch of your stuff on there as well. So anybody who's in the research fields or into science and into, you know, studying more about these things, obviously go and check Andrew out. He's always my go-to guy when it comes to the gut and understanding of it and really being able to explain it very well. So Andrew, thank you so much for your time, and thanks you for coming on the podcast, and hopefully we'll cross paths soon.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. Cheers.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.